The following is a presentation of the Matt Talk Podcast Network.
Welcome to On the Mat. I am Kyle Klingman of the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Dan Gable Museum, joined by a man who's going to get great sleep at the World Championships because the Yankees lost. It's Andy Hamilton of Trackwrestling.com. You got to feel good about having a consolation prize. You're shaking your head no. Why not?
I'm salty, Kyle.
Is it because it was the Red Sox?
That's part of it.
And you just love the Yankees that much that any loss stings?
It's just so abrupt, like 48 hours, not even 48 hours. Like I went into Monday night thinking, look, they got a good shot to win this series now. Going home, series tied 1-1, 2 games at home, advantage in their bullpen, got their whole lineup back together, and they just laid an egg.
What was it, 17-2? And then
I think it was like, I don't even know, 16-1 or something.
16-1, yeah. Yeah, it was 16-1. Worst loss in playoff history.
Yeah, whatever.
I know, but you got to feel good because you were going to fret how you were going to sleep.
I don't feel good, Kyle.
Yeah, you don't.
There's nothing that feels good about this.
All right, well,
nothing.
I was trying to give you a consolation prize.
There are none.
Okay, well, you should feel good about this.
This is like...
Yeah.
This is like international wrestling. You get beat, and the guy after you gets beat, you're done. So there's no consolation to that.
It stings, but
they're not going to get a comeback for a bronze if the Red Sox make the World Series. They're done.
Valid points. It's out. Only one team wins the last game of the season, right?
Indeed.
But hey, Pat Kelly is making us feel good. He's with Seaman Wrestling down in Kansas, and he sent us a message saying that he's going to implement PDI into his stat line. He gave us a sheet of what that looks like, has the wins, losses, weight classes, wrestler, and then a category called PDI. So thank you for doing that. We'll get into our heavyweight PDI a little bit later on this segment.
PDI is popular. It's becoming popular. We hear it a lot.
I'm glad. It just makes so much sense, Andy, to have this as a numerical value to what you do. I think it's a great trend, and it just adds another element to what you can do in the sport. And I think last week's weight class really proved that, with 6th, 7th, and 8th being better than 1, 2, and 3. And I think that gives you not a consolation, not that, but it just does show what your body of work is despite wins and losses. And I think that's what's so compelling about it. I hope you agree.
I agree.
But what's the next step? Hey, Pat Kelly's on board. What do we got to do to get this to another level so that it is part of the narrative? And so it's just a statistic like average or wins above replacement. How do we get this simple stat? It's so easy to implement. How do we make that happen?
I'm going to turn it around on you, Kyle. What do you think?
I think that the NWCA has to get on board with it. I think that's number one. So I think Mike Moyer would have to believe in it. And then I think
let's get Mike Moyer on the show.
You sold me right there.
Okay.
Let's pitch it to him. We're not even going to tell him what we're going to pitch.
Okay.
And so those who don't know, Mike Moyer is the president of the National Wrestling Coaches Association. And it doesn't really require any NCAA sanctions. I think it's something that any program can do at any time they want. Actually, I think that track wrestling can be the leader in this.
We could probably take some steps to making this happen.
I really do. I think you have the setup there, and that's the lane that you guys live in. So I think it's a good way. You ready for your first 3 Ask Andy questions? We have our new segment called Ask Andy. We're going to ask 3 questions that I got sent in to me. The first comes from a Dan G. from Iowa City, Iowa. He asked, what did you learn from your travel experiences at the Junior World Championships that can help you with future travel experiences?
Don't take anything for granted. I thought I was on a flight home out of Vienna on Austrian Airlines, and lo and behold, Austrian Airlines canceled my flight without really notifying me at all. So don't take anything for granted. And they put me on a flight the next morning to London and didn't bother to tell me I was on that flight to London. And so it ended up being a day-long scramble. So that's where I'm at with it. I would say don't take anything for granted. It's the only thing I've learned that I didn't know before.
Okay. Jason B. from Arden Hills, Minnesota asks, what will the orange juice in Budapest have to do to catapult itself over Paris?
I don't think anything can catapult over Paris. Now, we'll have to get Shane Sparks' opinion. He's not going to be with me in Budapest. You're going to be there, Kyle, so you can maybe give an opinion on that. But I'll tell you that orange juice in Paris was indeed life-changing. It's going to stick with me for the rest of my life. But that's the gold standard for orange juice.
Man.
And everything else is trying to get to that level. So if Budapest can get to that level, if the folks at the Danubius Hotel over there can whip up some orange juice like they did in Paris, I'll be impressed. I'll not only be impressed, I'll be floored. We need to somehow, some way recycle that Shane Sparks video. I don't know if we can do that on this show. It's probably not possible because I think you need the visual element. But maybe we could play it. Should we play it? Should we pull it up and just play the audio of it?
We could.
We could try that. Let's do that, Kyle.
Good evening from Paris, France, 2017 World Championships. It is Friday night local time, about 10:35. The wrestling has been phenomenal. It has been out of this world. Looking forward to putting a cherry on top tomorrow night. But another key storyline to this trip is this orange juice machine here inside the hotel. So, might have been right away on Monday, Andy Hamilton, who's working the camera right now, asks me if I had the orange juice. And I'm like, no, I didn't have it. He said, it is life-changing. It's orange juice. I mean, it's orange juice. But the next day, I come down here, I try this thing, and I'm telling you, it was life-changing. It is the most amazing orange juice in the world. It's got to be. And the way that it would work is you got the oranges up here. There's this lever right here, which you can't see anymore because somebody cranked on it and broke it. But you would push this lever down, the oranges would drop down, squeeze, grab a cup, drink the orange juice. It was amazing. I mean, it was life-changing. Unfortunately, we come down, I think, on, might have been Tuesday or Wednesday. I can't even remember now. It's been a long week. But we come down here and we see this. Temporarily out of service. Devastating is a strong word, but it was a bad start to the day. Disappointed. I take a picture of this, send a text up to Andy, and I have it like, not a good start to the day. And Andy and I are big baseball fans. We're using baseball analogies. Hey, is it going to be out for 10 days? Is it going to be a 15-day DL deal? God forbid, could it be a 60-day DL situation? Andy had faith in this thing. Andy's like, I think it's going to be all right. I was a little bit nervous. Because I'm thinking they got to get a part. We come down the following morning, and it's working again. And I can remember Brian Hazard was walking out. I'm creeping in the door, kind of just looking like, don't show me the sign. Didn't see the sign. Come in here. Boom, we're rolling. And then this morning we come down, and this is back again. So unfortunately, it's not going to happen. But we talked to Levins, who is the manager here, and he said, listen, he gave us a good 5-minute breakdown on why the other machine or the other thing they have is better than this. He was going to get us a sample, but it was a little bit too late. He wanted to give us one. We're going to be back tomorrow and give it a test. So we'll see what happens. He says that when we come down tomorrow, the orange juice that they have here, I don't know if it's new or whatever, maybe it's always been here, but he says it is going to be better than this. And I would simply say this, I got to see it, so I got to taste it to believe it.
So I guess to answer the question, Kyle, the one way that the orange juice in Budapest can be better than Paris is to be on that level in terms of quality, but better in terms of consistency with the machine. If we can get an orange juice machine that cranks out orange juice like that every day, we're in business.
Man, you got me excited about what the possibilities might be with this orange juice.
Well, don't get your hopes up.
I'm not.
If we go back to Paris sometime,
possibilities.
2024 Olympics, if we go back there, and maybe we'll have to make a trip across the city if we're not staying where we stayed last year at the World Championships. We'll make a trip across there for some orange juice.
How far would you travel to get this, just within reason? Or is there a limit?
I don't know, maybe
20 miles?
Couple blocks.
Couple blocks, okay. Life-altering,
I'm not a big orange juice guy. Maybe a little bit further than a couple blocks.
Okay, okay. Last question comes from Kyle K. from Cedar Falls. What do you look for in a good story?
What do I look for in a good story? Kyle K. from Cedar Falls. Do you know anybody?
I'm not disclosing last names here. I mean, you can connect the dots on who these people might be, but I don't want to disclose.
What do I look for in a good story? I look for conflict and resolution in a good feature story where there has to be a conflict, like a central conflict in the life or lives of the subjects I'm writing about, and how do they deal with that? How do they overcome it? I think those are the best stories when you have those two elements. And I think back to a couple of my favorites, or one of my favorites in particular, like the Daniel Dennis story that I wrote prior to the 2016 Olympic trials. The conflict with him was just all the injuries that he had dealt with and getting away from wrestling and, going out and kind of finding a new chapter in his life, rock climbing and totally getting away from wrestling there for a little bit, and body heals up. And then also in terms of conflict in that story, you had the way that his career ended at the University of Iowa, losing an NCAA championship in the last 5 seconds of a match there to Jason Ness, and the heartache he dealt with from that, and getting his body and mind right and making that run for through the world team, or the Olympic trials in 2016, and making the Olympic team. I think that that story had a lot of the elements of what I consider to be a really good story. And then more recently, the Richard Perry piece that I wrote, obviously everybody knows, and I shouldn't say everybody, but a lot of people in the wrestling community know about what he's going through right now and his recovery from that traumatic brain injury out at training Camp Pendleton. But also, his whole career in wrestling has been beating the odds with a guy that started wrestling late in his high school career, didn't start wrestling until he's a junior in high school, and then becomes a Connecticut state champion, and basically tries to almost beg Sacred Heart to walk onto their team, and didn't get the opportunity to wrestle there. They didn't give him hardly any response in his pursuit to get on the team there. And so he pursues Bloomsburg, has a tremendous career there, wins, I think, 110, 111 matches, and continues to just make these strides as a wrestler before the traumatic situation out at Camp Pendleton. But guy that rose up and made the national team, and in so many elements of his story where he's just been able to beat the odds. It's been a tremendous story, and I think Rich is already on his path to making his story an even better one with the progress that he's making in his recovery and in rehabilitation. So those are a couple of the key elements that I really look for in storytelling.
If you want to ask Andy a question, email me, kklingman@nwhof.org. We'll ask Andy in future shows. We have a few things to make sure we cover. Helen Maroulis looked dominant in her quest to make another world team and her potentially 4th world or Olympic championship in a row. No real surprise there. She won back-to-back matches, a few people in the stands at Lehigh, but glad that we have Helen back on the team. Makes it that much better.
Especially with what she's dealt with this year and trying to get back out there and compete again after suffering a reported concussion over at the Indian Pro League. And we went 8 months and only saw her on the mat once at the Beat the Streets, and that was it. And so good to have her back, and hopefully she's clear of all complications with what she's been through and can have a healthy rest of her career here and really showcase what she can do. And, she talked after the win on Saturday about, just basically being ready to walk away. If there were going to be any future issues here. And so we certainly don't want to see that. We want to see Helen healthy and able to showcase all the skills that she has.
Man, she has a great Instagram following too. She gets so many likes, so many hits if she posts a video. So she's really been a positive advocate for the sport. And I just want her in there as long as possible. She's just been that good. She is the face for women's wrestling. Adeline Gray's right there too, but those two are really guiding the ship. And to not have Helen Maroulis at the World Championships, I think would be a blow for the United States. So very glad it worked out. Very glad that she's on the team. And after last year, man, what she did last year and the way she blitzed through it, man, she's a special talent. And if she's feeling healthy and can get something comparable to that this season, the competition's in for a beating.
Yeah, I don't think she has to be at full capacity. She went out and outscored the competition 52-0 last year in Paris. It was 34-0 in Vegas in 2015. So she's on quite a run at the World Championships, and then throw in the historic Olympic gold for the United States at the 2016 Olympics. And man, if you look back and her impact on the sport, it's been tremendous to this point. But I think when we get 10 years down the road and we see how many world and Olympic medals she's racked up at that point, that's only going to be part of the story, the Helen Maroulis story. I don't think we're ever going to be able to totally measure her impact on this sport because of how many young women that she has positively impacted and inspired to get into wrestling based off of what she did in 2016.
And it's at the right time with the social media age. We get more access to her, and to be able to hear her voice, hear what she has to say, you can understand what that journey has been about. I think it's just a great asset to have in the sport of wrestling. And I hope that she doesn't go away anytime soon, even if she isn't competing. I hope she's in here long term and that we never lose her in wrestling.
For sure. She's always got such a positive message to share. Yeah, eager to see what she can do in Budapest and what her career looks like going forward.
Before we transition into a little college wrestling, we have to make sure we plug that Stan Dziedzic, one of the vice presidents for United World Wrestling, will be on the show with us today. He was a world champion in 77, Olympic bronze medalist, and then was an NCAA champion for a now-dropped program at Slippery Rock. So we'll get a chance to pick his brain about a variety of topics. One topic that came up, now every single wrestler at the Division I NCAA Wrestling Championships will be seeded. I don't know if it's really a storyline, but it's going to happen, and I'm just trying to play through the scenario in my head, what that looks like. I think it's, if you're seeded 32 and 33, those two will be in the pigtail from what I understand. I don't know if it's about time for it. I hadn't even thought about it. Had you thought about it?
Yeah, I've been saying this for like 5 years. Yeah,
I didn't know this.
Like, if we've got the data for this, why are we, if we have the data to seed out to 16, why are we not just going to 33? If I'm going to pull up a bracket.
You know what year you're going to pull up?
I don't.
Just any random year, you're going to pull up a NCAA championship bracket.
I am going to pull up an NCAA championship bracket, maybe from like 2015 or 2016. In the meantime, Kyle, we're leaving next week for Budapest. Our next show, when and where is it going to go down?
I'm going to say at the venue.
At the venue? We're not going to do any along the way?
Oh, I would hope we're going to do one every single day.
Okay.
At some level, if we're just talking straight up podcast, I think we'll have to have one somewhere along the way that's the actual on the map. If we're looking at Facebook Lives, I got to say we're going to be hitting something up every single day, maybe even multiple times, depending on what happens. Hopefully we're talking multiple times because that means there's gold medal matches and medal matches for the United States. So that's my hope.
Maybe some Facebook Lives from the trip, too. So get on, follow Track Wrestling if you don't already.
I'm with it, man.
We'll post them, maybe share them on the Gable Museum site, too.
Yeah, this is a very historic run for the United States because, hey, even just looking at last year, I think one of the points that doesn't get brought up, this was, and you don't even want to say it's the first true world championship because that's not accurate, but hey, 92 Olympics, it was the unified team. The Soviet Union had collapsed, so the first two United States world championships were in 93 and 95. Now we've had all that history in between. 2017, we finally have 10 weight classes back. would be the first time to get back-to-back world championships in the United States. Boy, we better be doing a lot of Facebook Lives if that happens, because I think there's going to be a great celebration in the stands.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Got a bracket?
So I got a bracket pulled up.
All
2015. Right. This is the one I had in my mind. I wasn't 100% sure what Jesse Delgado, where he was in the bracket that year, but two-time NCAA champ, injury abbreviated season, comes back. He's non-seeded, and he draws Tyler Cox, the number 8 seed of Wyoming. That was the quad where you had Dylan Peters, a returning All-American. You had David Terrell, Jesse Delgado, and Tyler Cox. Terrell came out and made the quarterfinals, faced Alan Waters, and Waters beat him, and then got beat by Nathan Tomasello. Nathan Tomasello wins the bracket. But, I don't know where the data would put Jesse Delgado in this case, but it seemed like if you're and who knows, maybe it makes him the 32 or 33 based off the data. And in that case, he's facing Alan Waters if he wins, facing Alan Waters first round. But anyway, I mean, that's one that came to my mind is some of these guys that fall outside the top 16 who don't get seeded. You may have the number 17 guy. If you're the top seed, you may end up facing the 17th best guy. I just feel like if we can get to 32 and 33 with that data, it's the most equitable thing to do, to put the 1 against the 32, 33 and 2 against 31 and so on and so forth, where 16 should be facing 17. 16 shouldn't be facing 33 first round with number 1 facing 17.
I guess it
has team ramifications.
Yeah, it does.
Like, why not? What's the drawback
sense
to it? I mean, we can just spit out the data and figure it out really quickly.
Yeah, everything else is seeded according to record. The NCAA basketball championships are seeded according to a system.
Yeah, they don't seed it out like 1 to 32.
Yeah, so it's
or 1 to 8 in each sub bracket, right?
Yeah,
each regional.
Each regional has it seeded out, and you have a system that's fair, and I think everyone likes it. So once I heard that, I didn't know you were on board with it that much, but once I heard that they were going to seed out all the way to 33, it sounded reasonable, and I think it's a good move.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
All right, you excited about our final PDI?
I am.
Heavyweight?
Let's do it.
I think I was you said this, I was proven wrong. I thought it was going to be some dud numbers, and they were actually pretty solid across the board. Kyle Snyder, your NCAA wrestling champion at super heavyweight with an 11.5, didn't have too many matches on the season, had an 18-1 record, had the 1 loss to Adam Kuhn in the dual meet, but then got 2 matches against him at the Big Tens and then at the NCAA championships, 11.5, about what I'd expect.
Yeah, the thing is, Kyle wasn't fattening his stats against guys who were completely overmatched. I mean, well, I shouldn't say it that way because Kyle's the best wrestler on the planet, and so a lot of guys are overmatched against Kyle Snyder. But strength of schedule-wise, he was running into a lot of the top heavyweights just because of how limited his schedule was, and they were using him around his international schedule. And so it wasn't like Kyle was getting to beat up on a lot of guys where he could just go out and roll them up and score 22s. He was facing a lot of All-American caliber wrestlers.
And he's not a pinner by trade and had a few falls early in the season, so that bolstered his score. So an 11.5 for the best wrestler in the world, Kyle Snyder. Adam Kuhn, your runner-up, who will represent the United States in Greco at super heavyweight at 12.2. That's about right for Adam Kuhn. He had some solid wins throughout the season, a few falls in there. Had a nice string in there of pins, so nice number for Adam Kuhn.
12 falls for Adam Kuhn.
Amar Desi, 8.6. And then as you go down the line, he was 3rd place for Oregon State. Jacob Casper was a 9.1. Sam Stoll in 5th place was a 9.3. Mike Hughes was a 11.7. Nick Neville's 5.9. And then Yusuf Hamida of Maryland, 7.6.
4, 5, and 6 here are pretty interesting because you got Casper at 9.1, 8 falls, and he got pinned twice. So if you take his 2 falls completely out, strike those from the record, his average goes up to 10.7. Sam Stoll, a 9.3. He got pinned twice. He also had 2 disqualification wins and 10 falls. So subtract the 2 losses by fall, he goes from 9.3 up to 11.4. Mike Hughes, 11.7. Also got pinned twice, 13.3. He had 19 falls in his favor. Another thing that's interesting about Mike Hughes and going down his resume here, we talked a little bit about this off air, Kyle. He did not, up until January 1st, he had 1 match that went the distance in which he allowed a point. A regulation match that he allowed a point. Otherwise, a whole mess of pins and a bunch of shutout victories with 1 6-5 win over Sean Streck. That was all the way up until January 1st. So he was wrestling people. He was either pinning them or...
That's a great string, man.
Getting on top and riding them and not letting them get away.
Any numbers here that surprised you? They were across the board fairly high. I think Sam Stoll had a pretty high number, even though he got pinned a couple times on the season. 9.3 is still a solid number.
Hamida at 7.6 was a little bit higher than I imagined, just because you look around the Big Ten, look at this list, even Snyder, Kuhn, Stoll, Nevels. He's running into a lot of top competition throughout the regular season, and then to come back and finish 8th and still put up a 7.6. 7.6, that was, you have last week's numbers readily available?
I do.
What was the highest we had last week?
Last week, the high
Darmstadt
was 12.2.
Okay, what were the other guys at 197? They weren't
12.2. So the top ones were 6, 7, and 8. So I went 12.2, 11.8 for Shakur Rashid, and then Willie Miklas was 8.9, and he was 8th.
But he would have been higher than the top 5 at 97, right?
6.72 for Machiavello. Jared Hott was 5.9, and then Kyle Cannell was 4.4.
Okay.
So, yeah, much higher.
Heavyweights putting people away a little bit better than 197.
Yeah, Colin Moore 6.9. Holschlag was 4. So, yeah, they were quite a bit higher.
It's probably not unexpected that heavyweights are scoring more falls, but we're also seeing some of these heavyweights rack up some technical falls and double-digit wins as well. We've seen a change in the way heavyweights wrestle here in the last 5 or 6 years, starting with kind of the Nick Wisdowski group. Nick Wisdowski, Ty Walls, Kyle Snyder, talking about Connor Medberry. Those type of guys put a lot of points on the board. Were a lot of fun to watch, and I think we're just seeing a change in how heavyweights wrestle, and it's really good to see.
Or even that Neville-Snyder match, you go back to that, what was the score there?
15-10?
15-10.
In the dual meet?
In the dual meet.
And that's the match that sparked a lot of this discussion, right?
Yeah.
Where we're talking about watching it on TV and not knowing who in the world wins if Snyder gets a major decision.
Yeah, that was a big part of it.
How many points he had to win by for Ohio State to win the duel.
So you're looking at 15-10, and it's you saw Neville's kind of get Snyder out of his game a little bit. You saw Snyder going for some throws and some things that weren't typical of his style, and that ended up being the deciding factor in why Ohio State dropped that dual meet, even though Jason Nolf was out of the duel with an injury. Penn State still found a way to do it. I don't know that we broke it down. Did we actually do the dual meet as numerical values? We probably did at some point, but I think it would be just a good comparative analysis to see what the actual dual meet score was compared to what the actual points were in that duel.
Hey, we can do that right now too, Kyle. It's the power of the internet.
So if we went with straight scoring, so if the amount of points you score in a match equates to what the final team score was, there were no falls in the Penn State versus Ohio State dual meet, Penn State would have won 95-88. I think that's a much better indicator of what happened in the dual meet. And that's why Kyle Snyder needed to win by more than a regular decision in order to win the duel.
Yeah, I think that wouldn't have been a lot better if we just saw it on the scoreboard what the running total was.
Oh, yeah. I think that would add so much to the meet. Even with the archaic scoring they have, I think it would be good for the fans not to second guess it and try to tabulate it. I think that's what makes it exciting and what would have been a great conclusion to know, because every single point matters. And I think they did mention that when they had the dual meet. You knew what the spread Kyle Snyder needed, and he was going for it. But I think we need to have some way to incentivize that so that fans can really get behind it.
We need to do some dual meets where there were some falls in there. This one, no falls. This is straight up. Every match went the distance with the exception of the tech falls in there, but no falls. So we should add up a dual meet where a couple 3 falls.
Because that's the critique as far as it relates to duels. You could get 1 fall and 9 wins by 1 point, and you crush the dual meet.
Yeah, but by the same token, like, you can outgain a team 500 to 100 in football and get beat.
You can.
You know, you can win.
So I'm not against it.
You can win an IndyCar or NASCAR race by leading only 1 lap. You can win a baseball game in which you get out hit 10-1.
You're
goofy stuff.
You're making my point. Yeah, that's why I don't think it's a bad thing to do that. And
you can win a wrestling match in which you've been outscored 14-2. We saw that in the NCAA finals.
We have, and it still goes to the point that dual meets don't have an end of the year championship, so it's still all practice, it's still all fun, so why not just roll the dice and try this system? Because there is no dual meet championship.
You just convinced me, Kyle.
I'm glad. Now we have to convince Mike Morier when we get him on the program and really lay it on thick with him. What do you say we get Stan Dziedzic on the line?
Let's do it.
Our guest today has a colorful career in the sport of wrestling. He was a 3-time Division II NCAA wrestling champion at Slippery Rock. It was back in the day where you could go to Division I's, and he went to Division I's 3 times, placed 3rd, 1st, and 2nd at the Division I National Championships, won an Olympic bronze medal in 1976, world champion in 1977, but most importantly, he is our representative from the United States. He is a UWW vice president. It is Stan Dziedzic. How are you, Stan?
I'm fine, Kyle. How are you?
Good. And as we look at this, we have a 5-year anniversary of potentially having wrestling drop from the Olympic Games. And I think the World Championships in 2013 were in Budapest. As we look at 5 years from that time, where are we as a sport internationally? What progress has been made from your vantage point?
Well, quite a bit. I think mostly, and some of this had been already in motion, mostly the rules, and well, not mostly. I think mostly is the role that our new president of wrestling, the positions that he holds within the IOC, and it's amazing having, one, if not the oldest sport, never really having any representation on the IOC, which was sort of at the foundation of our problems when we were potentially looking at being eliminated from the Olympic program.
Why did we get to that point, Stan?
Well, what a question. And I'm going to digress here quite a bit, and first of all, about a few things that we were fortuitous that it did happen, and I could make the answer very short that, our leader was touch arrogant, overconfident. But, some of the things that have transpired, and this is not in his defense in any way, because I don't think the way he handled it is defendable. But prior to that vote, we had, following the Olympics in London, we had a meeting in Budapest Thanksgiving weekend. And Zeke Jones, the U.S. coach, then U.S. coach at the time, attended the meeting. And the meeting was a technical meeting to readdress the rules. But as the weekend progressed and we made some progress, the constriction that we could not change the best of 3 with the 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 ball pull and the clinch as a deciding factor, that was not on the table. And when I walked away from that meeting, and I think several of us did, I was ready to go to the Bureau meeting and say, look, we can make changes, but we cannot make a set of rules that'll be dynamic, that'll advance our sport, unless we can eliminate the best of three clinch situation. So that, after our meetings, and, I was sort of contemplating and what to do, and we had dinner that night, and part of the meeting, Misha Mamiashvili, another vice president from Russia, with Greco-Roman expertise, sensed, I guess, that I was, thinking, pondering what to do. And after the dinner, he came up to me. He doesn't speak English that much, but he came up to me and goes, Stan, you agree to authoritarian? And I said, yes, I agree. And although the thought was going to my mind, hopefully you're not thinking that it would be you. And I don't mean that in a negative way, but that was a thought that originally went in my mind. But he was correct, and I think he sensed that. And shortly thereafter, I received communication that a group of Bureau members all felt that we were run, that was too authoritarian, and our leader was too authoritarian. And so they met in Istanbul, if my memory serves me correct, although the representative from Uzbekistan and myself, in a short notice, couldn't make it. But we were kept apprised of what was discussed. Had we not had that meeting, we would never have been able, in my mind, in such a short notice, be able to attack or not attack, but address this issue of the leadership and oust leadership that once the IOC made the vote, that had to happen. And so I turned the clock just ahead to Thailand, where we were having our bureau meeting, and my wife and I were in the cab from the airport to our hotel in Bangkok, and then we were going to go on to Phuket, where the meetings were. But we were spending a day in Bangkok. We got a call from Bill Shear. Bill says, the IOC is recommending that wrestling be dropped from the Olympic program. I said, what? You mean one of the disciplines? And he goes, no, the sport. And I said, based on what? Where? How? I had no idea that this meeting was occurring, the IOC meeting. But all of a sudden, that's what we were faced with. And they had formed a group, they being the United States wrestling people, like Colt Seapow and Bill Shear, Jim Shear, Andy Barth, John Bardis, Mike Novogratz, Rich Bender, to name a few. But it was a invaluable group of people with knowledge and understanding of what to happen. So I was in communication with them constantly during these meetings. So when I get to Phuket, several of the group of people that had met in Istanbul, and remember, I say, had they not met, I don't think we would have had the luxury of having this communication. But then we met and said, and I think there was a consensus that no matter what your opinion was of the president, the then president, Martinetti, there was no way that we could reverse the decision without making substantive change, and that substantive change probably meant that the president needed to resign. And so we had a meeting that first night, and it wasn't the official meetings weren't scheduled for the next day till the next day. And perhaps I probably shouldn't have, given my hand away in sort of a way, but I spoke a little bit saying that, look, this is a serious situation, and this isn't something that if we don't do something here this weekend that's substantive, we're going to have a very difficult time to undo this situation. Because I was getting all that input and all these discussions from all these different people. And so what we would find out later, he would have a meeting of other people that night, and he was convinced that he could withstand a vote of confidence. He would win a vote of confidence. And so the next day, when we start the meeting, and of course I didn't sleep all night, and I had come to the conclusion that I would have to offer my resignation along with the president, and I would also ask one of the other vice presidents, that the three of us would form a group and make the transition easier, and that would be the best thing for wrestling. And so when he starts, and I start looking around, and I look the seating arrangements, and then I became completely convinced that I knew I was going to have to offer my resignation. And he said he wanted a vote of confidence. And I said, before we do that, why don't we discuss this transition? And he immediately said no. And that's when I began to be worried that perhaps he had the number of votes to get this vote of confidence. And as the seating arrangement went, the first 5 or 6 went in favor of retaining him as the president. And then we got into the current president now, the Bulgarian. I don't necessarily need to tell you how it all went, other than the fact that I was the last vote. And at that juncture, it was 10-10, and I was the deciding vote that made it 11-10 to remove him as the president of FILA. And there were, the arguments just started going on and on and on, and it became senseless. And I said, he left the room. And so I just said, I said to the gentleman from Guatemala, Francisco, just go out. Mr. Martinetti said that if he didn't get a vote of confidence, he was willing to leave and resign. So I said, go out and tell him he didn't get a vote of confidence. And so he told him. He stormed back in, Mamiashvili, and Martinetti, shared words and a little bit with President Lalovich, and he left. At that time, I thought that was sort of the end of it. But what was completely interesting, because the Russian was having contacts back in Moscow with his group of people. And as I said, we formed this CPOW, and I was having contact with them. Well, one of the suggestions was that we needed to hire a strategist, and there was a TENEO, TENEO, I think they do also other politics, but had a sports group that was formed when the Olympics were here in Atlanta. I didn't know it at the time. But anyway, it was an amazing coincidence that after we started discussing how we would move forward, because once Martinetti did accept my recommendation, it was, my resignation, it was who now would lead the Bureau. And, some people were suggesting, Stan, why don't you do this? And I said it would be disingenuous of me to sit here and say that we needed to make a change in order to save our sport, and that meant eliminating President Martinetti. But it would be disingenuous of me to think that it was the best thing of wrestling that I would do it, when we know that Americans are not well liked in the Olympic movement. And this goes way back. It's not just wrestling. It's not. If you look, there are no presidents of international federations that I know of, any of them that are from the United States, even though we win the Olympic Games. And part of it goes back to when Peter Uberoff when the Olympics were under siege following the boycott in 1980. And then he was hosting the games in Los Angeles. And when you look at it, there was some logic to it. A disproportionate share of the money coming from the Olympic Games from TV came from U.S. stations. It was either NBC would win one year, CBS would win one year, ABC would do the next. So there was reason why United States Olympic Committee received a disproportionate share. Probably, I can't remember exactly, but I believe they received as much as all of the other Olympic committees combined in the world. And so there was a move to try to make that in their minds, all the other 50%, that received 50%, all of them that it should be changed. I think the USOC was willing to negotiate a change, but what they weren't willing to do was to give back money from previous Olympic Games. And that was where the stalemate was, and that was the reason why. And having known that, it's like, why would I put myself in that situation when I'm not that doesn't do much for the sport? And when you looked at, and I recommended that Nenad Lalovic, although not someone with wide wrestling experience, but he had the language skills. His father was a Yugoslavian diplomat. I think in grade school, he went to school in Belgium and then high school and college in Switzerland. His father was ambassador to Belgium, to Switzerland, to Tunisia, Austria. So he had the diplomatic skills and the language skills. And frankly, it's terribly difficult with the headquarters outside of Lausanne, Switzerland, for someone from the United States to run the organization. So that was where we started. And the first thing, eventually I would go home and we all agreed that at that meeting that we would try to hire the expertise of this Tenio Holdings. And then when I got home, shortly thereafter, I had agreed, along with the person from Turkey, the representative from Turkey, that we would go back to Switzerland, go back to the headquarters, spend as much time as we needed to try to sort through this all and begin the process on how we were going to organize. And Rich Bender from USA Wrestling had procured this. He had just retired from the USOC, and a longtime press secretary named Bob Condren, and he also was part of the press corps of the IOC. And so Bob, he said, I said, well, I'm going back to Switzerland, whatever it was, in 3 days or 4 days, and why doesn't Bob go back, and I'll try to work him into and Nenad will be there. And so we went back, and Bob was invaluable because he knew within the IOC who we needed to speak to on these different items, because we didn't know who ran that meeting where they decided that where the executive committee decided that they were going to recommend to the entire assembly to remove wrestling from the Olympic program. So he set up a meeting with Christoph Dubie and his assistant, I think Hannah Burns was her name. And I had met Christoph just by chance because the USOC had hosted the Athletes Commission. And it was in Colorado Springs, and I had assigned Jordanov from Bulgaria to go, and at the last minute he wasn't able to go, so I went. So it wasn't like he was a stranger to me. So I met Bob. I never met him before. I met him actually in the airport in Lausanne, and we traveled to then Fila's headquarters, and they have rooms, in an adjacent building. So we stayed there, and the nod was there, and then we began to look at this. And then the next day we went over to, Fila Bureaus. It's like Vevey, which is probably about a 40-minute drive from Lausanne. But anyway, we drove over to Lausanne. We met with Christoph, and the first thing that Christoph Dubé said, he says, let me start with this. He said, if somebody would have told me before the meeting happened that wrestling was going to be the sport to be out, I would not have bet a penny. He said, but now that it's happened, here's your problems. And the arrogance became so apparent. And this then began to, raise anger for me, because he showed us, although he redacted sort of all the other sports, answers, but he showed us this one question that each of the federations, among a whole other list of questions. But the question is, why should your sport be in the Olympic Games? You know what wrestling's answer was? It was because it's the oldest sport. All the other sports had, a page, listing all of their attributes and what they contribute to the Olympic movement, but not wrestling. So it was apparent that that his arrogance was probably at the root of wrestling's demise. So, but he would then change to fight the fact that he resigned by saying that he resigned as president, but he did not resign or relinquish his position as a bureau member. So we had a whole series of internal meetings. We had an extraordinary Congress to approve this. That was held in Moscow. And I have to say that, like we had CPOW, they had a group of people with immense amount of knowledge and insights into the Olympic program. And of course it was, they were not that far away from hosting the games in Sochi. So they hosted the meeting in Moscow. You can imagine how difficult it was to get everyone, all of these Congress members from some 70-some countries around the world, into Moscow for an extra Congress vote and get them all on board to do what we needed to do. And that started with making certain that Rafi Martinetti was no longer part of the Bureau. And one of his best friends, longtime best friend, Pelliconi from Italy, I can remember I was sitting next to him, and they were really close friends. And Martinetti goes on why he should, still be in, part of the Bureau and all this. And I think when Mr. Pelliconi looked at him and said, it's not the best thing for wrestling, it sort of deflated him and made certain that he was saying, even your best friends no longer support you. And that was sort of a pivotal moment that we could put that behind us. We, the sport of wrestling, could put that behind us, and we could start marching forward and using the expertise of this Tenio. And fortunately, the first meeting that chose from the sports who, and I can't remember, I think there were probably 12 or 13 sports. They were going to narrow it down to 2 or 3 to be on the program. And that included men's baseball and women's softball, wrestling. And this happened in St. Petersburg. So the fact that that was the next step, that we had to be in that group to be able to go on to Argentina to decide which of the sports was going to emerge and whether wrestling would stay. So it was it's kind of interesting. I think the situation was something like, and Vladimir Putin, of course, well liked by the IOC at that time, and I think he made something that, look, I don't want to interfere with and try to throw my sport behind my position behind wrestling, but I would like to take, after you guys vote, I would like to have dinner with you. So, but he made the call before the vote, not after the vote. And I think it was clear that the audience there, and I recall sitting in the room when the IOC came out and made the decision on the vote on who was going to move on to Argentina. And there were several, they would, of course, when wrestling was announced, the whole room erupted, screaming, in cheers. Mm-hmm. But when the two or three others were, there wasn't much anyone saying anything. So it was clear that at least in that audience, wrestling had the upper hand.
But take us through a little bit of the mentality of international wrestling. I think in the United States, we look at things in black and white, that the best wrestler should win. You've seen a lot of the inequities that have happened in international wrestling. First of all, why does that happen? And are we past that point where throwing matches are going to happen? Countries try to pay off other wrestlers. Maybe take us through a little bit of the thinking of some of those international countries and how they view getting a gold medal.
Well, okay, that's a good question, and I think the responsibility of United World Wrestling at its foundation is to do exactly that. Make sure that the wrestling match is in the hands of the wrestlers and is not influenced by either of those people on the United World Wrestling Bureau, the referees, or performance-enhancing substances. So you have to install a very sturdy system. And those changes have been made leading after the problems that Russia had. Leading up to the Olympic Games in Rio, we had installed a very sturdy system within Russia. So we didn't use RUSADA. We hired the expertise of a Swedish company. And then the Swedish company actually, and I don't know if any other sport could do this, but the Swedish company had the wherewithal and the okay to, in and out of competition, test the Russian athletes and never lose sight of the specimen, and would take it to one of the most respected labs in Cologne, Germany, of the IOC. So that helped us at least to say that, maybe somebody can beat this test, but we're going to do everything we can to install it. To put this in place. And if you recall, leading up to the Rio Olympics, that there was any athlete who had ever tested positive would be off limits to go to the Olympic Games. So I don't know if you remember I want to say like maybe 57 kilos. He was a world champion, Siberian, maybe from Krasnoyarsk. Anyway, I recall that he was a world champion. I think he replaced Kudakov of the Russian wrestlers. So like maybe he won maybe like 2013, 2014. Well, he had tested positive as a junior some 12 years ago or something like that. And so we said he wasn't eligible. And, but eventually CAS, the Court of Arbitration of Sport in Lausanne, Switzerland, allowed him to compete. They said that, 6 years ago, I don't care what the IOC says, and so even if there were other athletes that the point I'm making is that we were stricter than anyone than the world allowed us to be.
Yeah.
And now, as far as the referees, I think in Rio, I probably was, upset because I believed that there were several countries that in concert were installing favorable refereeing bodies that in certain circumstances had the ability to possibly change the outcome of the match. And I think the one that comes to me that was the most critical was Gomez from Puerto Rico against the, I want to say the Uzbek. It was either Uzbek, Azerbaijan, or Russia. Those were the three that.
It was Uzbek.
And so, do you recall?
Yeah, it was Uzbek.
Uzbek, okay. And that to me was clear. I mean, everyone looked at the review. They all agreed, but despite it, they couldn't change it. And I then noted, although maybe as an aside, somebody had said something to me earlier in the tournament that he was suspect of the refereeing. So I was paying more. I was a delegate, and so I was paying more attention and taking notes all along. And although that was late in the tournament, but there were other matches. I thought the match between the Russian for the gold medal between the Russian and the Ukraine, 82 or 84 kilograms in Greco-Roman, was extremely suspect. And sometimes these things are subtle. I mean, because when people go back and they look at that Ukraine match, and it was in the end the Russian won by like 5 points, but it was things that happened when it was close that would have changed the whole dynamics going forward. But in any event, I, filed my report. Was very outspoken at the next bureau meeting. Myself and several people got into a shouting match. But in the end, we being the United World Wrestling Bureau, installed a program that now no longer do the referees choose the referees. There's a computer program that chooses among the available referees for that particular match, eliminating, of course, anyone from like countries and then so that becomes the refereeing body. So I don't think that necessarily eliminates it, but if you don't allow anyone, coaches or bureau members or any other team leaders, contact with the referees, so the referees are separated. During the competition, when this computer then can pick the referees, they won't know who those referees are beforehand for any of those matches, and they won't be able to have access to them, even if they do know. So I'm not saying that eliminates it, because I think one of the problems is that when, just like the United States, the referees don't earn their position to go to the Olympic Games absent of the federation. the federation presents their referees. So there always will be some attachment. Now, eventually, I would think that, and it's not practical right now, but at some point it would be nice that if we had a fully professional refereeing committee. Now, we have hired, although not full time, they don't reside in Corsier, Switzerland, but the Antonio Silvestri from Germany and Zach Ehret from the United States are both on the payroll now of United World Wrestling. So they no longer answer to the USA or to Germany or anyone else. You know, they answer to United World Wrestling, which, not that I had ever had any doubts with Zach Ehret. I don't. You know, I trust him implicitly. But that wasn't the situation. But I think I think that helps that they become now, in many cases, cohorts with the bureau or certainly with the staff there in Switzerland. So I would like to think that we've made progress. I'd like to say that, look, I'm fully confident that this will never happen again. But, I think I've had experiences, since I was the first national coach. And I think prior to that, United States had different coach all the time. And then no one ever got to know somebody. And then when all of a sudden we had a national coach, I recall this was, and I have told this story before, but I remember when Lee Kemp, and of course, Lee beats the best guy in the world by 2 points, and he beats the worst guy in the world by 2 points. But the situation in his first world championship with an opponent, there were 10 opponents left and only the top 6 place. And so if Lee doesn't beat him by more than 8, he places in the top 6. If Lee beats him by more than 8, he doesn't. And Lee had beaten the Iranian by a close match, the Soviet by a close match. So he had these matches that they didn't realize it. Yeah, they were naturally coached because these were the best wrestlers. And so they came to me and they said, the coach said, Stan, we will throw the match to Mr. Kemp if he doesn't beat us by more than 8 points. I said, we don't do that. And I said, sorry, shook his hand, walked away, and thought to myself as I was walking away, damn it, Lee Kemp doesn't beat anyone by more than 8 points. And sure enough, Lee beats him by 4 points. I look over to the corner, and he gives me the thumbs up sign. And I cringe every time I see him to this day. But so that was a normal practice. And I think some of the things that have changed that, of course, going away from the round robin. As good as the round robin was ultimately in picking the champions, the bad part was that inevitably, and not just rarely, there would be situations where one wrestler could not win, but he could determine, or she could determine, who among the 2 other wrestlers was champion. And that's just a recipe for disaster. Yeah. And, of course, back when it was, communist countries, that they were more linked, that happened more often. So even if we did have the round robin, we may not have had as much of a problem, but you just have to eliminate those situations. So I'm hoping that the structure we have makes it such that there's no benefit for that to happen.
Stan,
I don't know if I've answered your question fully, but
I got a couple for you, Stan. Number one, I guess, first of all, do you know where Rafael Martinetti is now and what he's doing?
Yeah, he still lives in Martigny, Switzerland. That's where he's from. He came to the World Championship in Paris. I hadn't seen him much anywhere. He came for a couple of days. His business was, although his sons had taken over his business and had run his business for a long time, he had been retired, but he still lives in Martigny. Yeah.
And then secondly, what would wrestling look like, in your opinion, now, had it not been dropped from the Olympics? Where would we be as a sport right now?
One, we certainly wouldn't be where we are now. We wouldn't have a president who's in the position that he has, and the relationships that he's established with the IOC. We won't have a set of rules, especially the freestyle rules, that made wrestling as dynamic as it is. Nor probably would we have addressed the inequities in the refereeing. Not that Raffi Martinetti, the one thing, I mean, Raffi Martinetti was a pretty good referee, among maybe the best during my lifetime. But that doesn't mean that a referee is infallible. And I think at times he interjected himself into situations where, and I think maybe the match with Jake Herbert and the Sharifov of Azerbaijan in London is one example that maybe your audience would remember. And I think it's just better left alone, and the optics of that was bad. So I think the optics for the wrestling, we would be viewed as not a good partner in the Olympic movement. We wouldn't have the positions where we have the audience in the Olympic movement. We wouldn't have the rules that we have. I think we've been in a very bad position, and not that. And there's some other things that happen that beyond him, But I think right now, not that I wish any ill will on the other sports, but boxing seems to be shooting themselves in the foot. Yes. To take away, where they're seeming to be the sport under spotlight.
Stan, you wrestled at 163 pounds, 74 kilograms, world champion in 1977 there. There's also a good guy named Jordan Burroughs at that weight class right now. You're known as a great strategist. How would you beat Jordan Burroughs?
I don't know. Well, I certainly wouldn't, even if somehow I had a formula, I wouldn't be wanting to telegraph it.
That's true. Good point.
Okay.
Good point.
So maybe, I think he and a couple of others, Kyle, and as well, I have, are much better than appears to the average spectator. And, I think, more than anything, I would think that Jordan and Kyle both, it'll be interesting to see Kyle and Sechelayev. And I think, I don't know this new Russian at 74 kilograms, but I'm almost certain, he was chosen or he earned his spot, however they had their tryouts, with the idea that Jordan Burroughs is, the number one target. So they're amassing every strategic difference that they can. But I think when you have the rules designed so that the best wrestlers prevail, that makes, some of the strategies, like using the edge of the mat or things that detract from the sport of wrestling, that makes it more difficult. And like I said, I think our rules right now, more than at any time, in the last 50 years, are designed so that the wrestlers decide, and the referees are there to judge, not to interpret or choose the winner. And I think that makes the task of beating Jordan Burroughs difficult.
So in your position, do you feel like you have to stay neutral, or are you cheering for the United States?
I can cheer for anyone. It doesn't mean I need to do it outright.
Yeah.
And I generally bite my tongue fairly well, although I will have to say that sitting in Paris when and I was next to a few gentlemen from the Dagestan region of Russia, where Suchalayev is from. So I couldn't contain myself when Kyle beat him. I did get up and yell, and they all looked at me. Like, you're not supposed to do that, Stan. Well, I'm up here in the back row. But I certainly, when I'm the delegate down on the floor, I certainly can't express my emotions. But yeah, the only reason I really do this, it's not. I mean, first and foremost, of course, is for the sport. But I think we, as a country, it's always been to our detriment that the things that you mentioned that had gone on, whether it was performance-enhancing substance, whether it's stacking the deck of the referees, all of those things are things that I don't know of anyone that has availed themselves to those sorts of methods of winning. So it's always in our best interest when the rules are designed so that the wrestlers decide. And I'm quite optimistic that this year, we probably couldn't have a better team, and the weight classes seem to line up well. From what I understand, the Russians have a great team, and I'm looking forward to seeing some great matches.
Stan, in your opinion, what are the biggest challenges the sport faces right now moving forward?
I think gender equity, where right now we have two men's discipline and one women's discipline. And although theoretically now they no longer look to gender equity within the sport. So sometimes that will look like saying, okay, wrestling has two men's and one women discipline, a woman's discipline. And they'll say that, oh, well, they have, some, synchronized swimming that the women have and the men don't have. So that can balance itself out. But I wouldn't depend on that being the salvation. So I would think that one of the men's discipline has, or we have to develop another women's discipline. And that's, I think, the challenge in the Olympic program.
Is that more likely, in your opinion, like something like beach wrestling or women's Greco?
Yeah, beach wrestling probably would be at the top of the list for the women. Greco-Roman seems to be out of the question. There doesn't seem to be much interest in anywhere in the world where the women's wrestling is very popular, like Japan or the United States or Canada or Russia. They don't seem to be inclined to start a Greco-Roman.
When do you get to Budapest?
I get there the 17th.
Okay, so it's just a few days away for you.
Yeah, 18th we have a executive committee meeting and then a bureau meeting, and then the 19th we have the Congress, And of course, that's the election, and I'm up for re-election. So, and then that evening we have the Hall of Fame.
Well, if it's any consolation at all, your Olympic coach from 1976, Wayne Bachman, said you're the perfect person to represent the United States. So I don't know how you take that, but congratulations on that.
And I am going to take this opportunity to, not for myself, but I do want to say that this year at the Hall of Fame, we are inducting Kenny Monday, who is the first black wrestler ever to win a gold medal in the Olympics. And I don't mean the first African American. I mean the first black wrestler anywhere. There are other Africans like Egyptians, but he's the first black wrestler. It's hard to fathom, given the success that Cuba and the United States and other black wrestlers, even from the Ukraine, that have had in Italy, that have had success here in the last 30 years. It's hard to fathom the fact that it took nearly 100 years before a black wrestler won an Olympic gold medal.
Yeah, pretty amazing, isn't it?
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think 1980 certainly hurt that with the boycott and Lee Kemp being in there. He was certainly the front runner. But as we've talked about, that was in Moscow, so who knows what could have happened there with some foul play.
Well, look at 76, where I think if you look back, Lloyd Kieser could have, if he had lost the match to the Japanese, he would have won the gold medal. And because Finnegan is the only wrestler that I know that won a gold medal that lost twice, because he got pulled back in a force round robin because Kieser beat the Japanese wrestler, and then Finnegan comes and beats Kieser by more than by decisive decision, which was the marginal difference then in the round robin to determine the winner.
A lot of great history there.
Or he would have been. Of course. Yeah. Lloyd's the first black wrestler ever to win a gold medal in a world championship.
That's true. 1973.
1973 in Tehran. Yep. I remember it distinctly.
Stan, as you look forward 10 years from now, Olympics in Los Angeles, what does wrestling need to do to get back on firm footing at the Olympic level? Where do we stand right now with that?
Well, I think we are on the firm footing, and I think maybe just as an example, looking at Tokyo. Just recently, at our last executive committee meeting, we gave the president authority to do this, but the IOC schedule for wrestling and judo were at the same time, and Japanese broadcasting requested saying that the two most watched sports in the Tokyo Olympics for the Japanese will be judo and wrestling. And that they asked if they could be moved. So we agreed, hoping to get a few other concessions. But agreeing to move we agreed to move the wrestling to the last week rather than the first week with judo. So I think that's indicative of how popular, certainly and especially for the Japanese women in Tokyo. But it'll be one of the most difficult tickets and most watched discipline of the Olympic Games in Tokyo. I think France just recently announced that the gold medal matches of wrestling will be under the Eiffel Tower. They'll build a platform and a tent there. So it certainly is a showcase sport there in France as well. And hopefully that momentum will carry into Los Angeles.
Well, hopefully in Los Angeles 2028, you'll still be part of UWW as a vice president.
No, I can't be.
Term limits?
Well, I think most likely we'll put an age limit, term limit on maybe the president, but age limit on the Bureau members, I think it'll be 75. That is what was discussed in our last Bureau meeting, is most likely what will get accomplished here. And so I will turn, if I'm reelected here in Budapest, at the end of my 6-year term, I'll turn 75, right at the end of November, and the vote will probably be, 74, excuse me. The vote will probably be right there in I think the Olympic Games will probably be in August or something like that. So just before I turn 75.
Well, once you get off UWW, I think your next mission in life needs to be to get Slippery Rock Wrestling back. It pains me to say that they dropped the program.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it.
Man.
I was disappointed. And the way they handled it was even, because had they given us a warning or even a goal, I think we could have reached the goal of raising the money to maintain the program, but they never gave us that option.
Well, we appreciate your time on this program. We look forward to seeing you in the United States, holding your breath to see if the United States wins another world championship.
Oh, I think we're, hopefully right here this year. So I'm looking forward. There's several wrestlers that, have, and this has always been the case. And, in that 74 kilogram weight class, and they're around. I mean, I remember when I was, not only myself, but when I look then, when I was the coach, although this wasn't popular with some of the wrestlers at 82 kilograms, but leading up to Edmonton, Chris Gamble had won the world championship in 81 and then retired to go to Cornell Law School. So it was going to be someone new there. And we had Dave Schultz, who had not yet at that time beaten Lee, and Lee won every time. So I just, went with the coaching staff and asked, doesn't this seem to make sense that we should allow the loser between Lee and Dave to challenge at 82 kilograms? I mean, what chance do they have if they make it? I mean, they're giving up, about 17 pounds. So it's like, why, if they can give up 17 pounds and make the team, it's probably in the best interest. So Lee beat Dave. Dave moved up to 82. I think it was Schuler. I don't know. He wrestled Arizona State. He was maybe Athletes in Action. I think that's who Dave beat in the finals. And Dave won a bronze medal in Edmonton in 82. And so I when speaking to the fathers of some of the wrestlers that were challenging with Jordan Burroughs, I said, I don't know why they would be so inclined to not move up a weight class. And so, they finally have, and now we have two of them on the team, and I can't wait to see how they do it. I think Dave Taylor has really filled into that weight class. I don't know if he would have ever been able to stay down at the other weight class. Kyle Dake has lots of talent, and I'm anxious to see them and see how well they do. They have the opportunity.
It's going to be a fun World Championships. We get to experience it with you, and Track Wrestling will broadcast that live throughout. And we appreciate the time here, Stan. Always appreciate your insight, and we'll see what happens here in a couple weeks.
Hopefully I didn't I didn't spend too much time.
Hey, we loved it. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right. For Stan Dziedzic and Andy Hamilton, I'm Kyle Klingman. You've been listening On the Mat.
This show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.